I just played my first chess tournament of the year. There was a 2-day competition in the city of Fujairah, UAE. The first day was a blitz tournament. The second day was a puzzle solving competition. For now, I want to focus on the blitz tournament because the organizer was nice enough to let me record all 9 of my games. And I figured I'd do kind of a mini YouTube series sharing every round and hopefully providing a lot of the lessons from my games. There are a lot of grandmasters competing, but my goal was to play a lot of exciting, aggressive chess. I did end up playing some dubious gambits, including the Stafford Gambit, so stay tuned for that. But let's focus on the first game. And I think what I'll do is share the raw video of the game and provide some voiceover commentary. So please do let me know what you think about this format, if there's something I should do differently. But I think it'd be nice to actually share the raw video, share my thoughts after the fact, and I hope you enjoy. So let's hop into round one. This was round one. I was playing an FM from the UAE. You see us just trying to get in the zone before the game. But actually, right before the game began, I quickly checked my opponent's games in the online database. I used a website called chessabc.com, and I was able to identify that he is a d4 player, likes to play the Queen's Gambit, found a bunch of his Title Tuesday games. So I did have a basic idea of what to expect. I couldn't do too much extensive prep, but it's always nice to have an idea of what the opponent is likely to go into. So we shake hands, and I made my first mistake failing to start my opponent's clock, but he helped me out there. And we do go into a Queen's Gambit opening, c4, e6. The Queen's Gambit declined, and this is an opening I've been playing for many, many years of my chess career. Bishop g5, c6, pawn e3. And I took a very small pause here to just remember the move order. Play bishop to d6, which is a more aggressive line, and then pawn h6. This is actually the beginning of what I like to call the Casa-Corley variation. This is an opening that international master Casa-Corley has made a bit more popular over the years. Usually the bishop for black likes to go to e7 to break the pin, but from d6, this is a bit more of an aggressive setup. Sometimes black is trying to attack early on the king side. And my opponent paused here. The most common move by far is bishop h4, but he played bishop to f4, which is a very rare move. It does allow me to take the bishop and give white double pawns, which we do go into. But I was happy to imbalance the structure from early on, get castle quickly, and now one of my goals is to just use the e-file, which has been newly opened for my rook. And it was very clear that my opponent was out of any specific prep from early on, and I was still pretty much within my comfort zone. So he was still taking time, almost up a minute after about 10 moves. And he plays his move queen c2, which is a more flexible move. White is maybe considering castling queenside. Probably more often, castling kingside is a go-to plan for white. But yeah, this move is kind of keeping me guessing which side the king wants to go to. And I respond with a5, which has a few purposes. He plays knight to f3. And the point of a5 is not only to prepare a pawn storm, like if white does castle, then my pawn is ready to march forward. But I'm also preparing knight a6 and knight b4, ensuring if bishop takes a6, I can take back with the rook. So I do go for knight to a6, threatening to play knight b4. He responds with a3. I play rook e8 check. So we're still in the stage where both of us are trying to find optimal squares for our pieces. He has a few choices here. Plays knight e5, blocking the check. I play knight to c7. And my goal is to maneuver the knight to the center, knight e6, and attack both of his pawns. Now he does castle. I attack his pawns, and he defends both pawns with knight e2. So even though, white's structure is maybe a little bit broken, it's still pretty solid, and it's hard for me to actually exploit. And now I'm in a spot where I was trying to figure out what my plan is going into the middle game. My bishop is not so happy on c8, and it's still a question, how do I activate the rest of my pieces? Do I want to go for a kingside attack? Do I want to focus in the center? And the move I was considering, the move that I really wanted to play, is actually a difficult move to calculate because my main consideration is knight to e4. And you'll see that I took probably over a minute on this move, calculating knight e4. I was trying to figure out what happens after takes and takes and takes. Can I actually afford to sacrifice a pawn, but maybe have some tactics on the e-file? So despite getting the early time advantage, I'm now down on time. But I thought it was a critical moment because depending what I do here will dictate the course for the coming middle game. But I do go for knight e4. And yeah, this move has a benefit of enabling pawn f6 to kick the knight away. And if white doesn't take the knight, which is risky if like takes, idea is to play a move like f6 to get rid of the knight and have some discoveries on the e-file. So if white doesn't take the knight, then I can play a move like knight d6, where the knight is just much better placed in the center, and then f6 will likely follow. Yeah, sometimes it's nice to play a move like knight e4 in a blitz game, because then the opponent has to take a lot of time to calculate the variations as well. He plays g3, which is way more solid move, reinforcing f4. I drop back to d6. This is known as the Capablanca knight, when the knight is working very well with the c6 and d5 pawns. Still controls some key squares, and yeah, really harmonizes well with the structure. And now we see h4, which is maybe not the most logical move, but it does gain a bit of space on the king side. White structure is still very solid. I drop back to f8 with my knight, and this move unleashes my rook, but also my bishop. And with all of white's pawns on dark squares on the king side, this bishop really wants to enter the game. There's ideas of bishop to h3, maybe even bishop g4 if it becomes available. Maybe I'd play f6 at some point and then bishop g4. So gradually I'm trying to build up some pressure on the king side. So he plays rook e1, centralizing, a solid move. And it's one of these positions which is like very, very solid for both sides. Like we both have very few weaknesses. Even though light squares are maybe a little bit weak for white, it's hard to actually make use of them or even like find any way to crack white's position. And same thing with my position. Like h7's covered, f7's well defended. So sometimes positions like this, they're a bit more slow in nature, where what's required from both sides is just gradual improvements. But we're both taking a lot of time just to try and figure out what the short-term and long-term plans are. I was trying to find a move that has some logic in the position. I was also debating, like, does it make sense to commit to f6, which would kick the knight but weaken the light squares on my king side. Yeah, now we're both around 90 seconds on the clock. I do play bishop h3. So, I mean, the bishop looks nice here, but it's kind of in no man's land, and it is staring into empty space. I figured it's nice to at least put the bishop there and maybe get the queen to c8 to support the bishop. And yeah, very soon we're going to see how a relatively slow middle game just completely explodes. Hopefully that's not too much of a spoiler. But with time getting low, yeah, things are definitely about to heat up. Opponent has fallen below a minute on the clock. And there was a 3-second increment, so yeah, sometimes with an increment like that, it's easy to get a bit complacent and fall lower on time. We see knight c3. I quickly play queen f6, so getting the queen into play. He plays rook to e2. perhaps preparing the double up on the e-file. The problem with rook e2, we're about to see, is I have this move knight e6, and surprisingly, it's very difficult for white to defend this pawn on d4 because there's no knight e2. And with my opponent's time getting very, very low, he was scrambling to find any resource. And he played a smart move, rook to d1, which sets up the tactic that if I take on d4, he'll have bishop h7 to win material. So yeah, even though the d4 pawn is not defended directly, it is basically defended by tactics. And now I have to figure out, is there any way for me to actually still try and win the pawn on d4? Now I fall below a minute. Now I was really, really happy with the move I played, king to h8, which very simply prevents the idea of bishop h7 check. And the bishop doesn't actually have anywhere good to go to defend the pawn. He plays king h2 to try and counterattack my bishop on h3, but I counterattack, taking the pawn, forking the queen and the rook, and he hesitates here, but actually doesn't play queen d2 in time. He flags, and the game ends just very abruptly. So yeah, that was round one. I managed to win in only 22 moves. And I think it was a game that definitely had some important lessons. Like if we go back to the opening, I think it was just very solid. Like bishop f4 was definitely a bit offbeat, but we both got like a very solid position. I do want to note that in this specific position, the engine says queen b6 is very strong, which I should have at least considered. Now, it's not the simplest line because white has this move queen e2 to check and defend, and the only way for black to keep an advantage here is to play king d8 to threaten rook e8 to pin the queen to the king, and also leaving the d4 pawn still attacked. And there's a line where white can castle, black can take the pawn. I don't know if I actually want to go into this in a blitz game, but according to the engine, black is just up a pawn, and white has like, pretty minimal compensation, despite the fact black lost casting rights. So it was a missed opportunity. Maybe this is something I'd calculate more deeply if it were classical. But yeah, going forward into the middle game, I think my opponent just made one very grave error with rook e2. It was a very natural looking move, but he just didn't sense the danger of this pawn being weak. Probably should have played a move like rook d1. Maybe look to play bishop f1 to trade off light square bishops. But we see how a singular weak pawn in the middle game can lead to everything crumbling for white's position. And yeah, king h8 was a nice move because the bishop from d3 just doesn't have any good squares. I'm covering the diagonal on the queen side and the diagonal on the king side. I guess I should note bishop h7 would defend the pawn, but it would just walk into g6, getting the bishop trapped. So yeah, white was in big trouble here. Best move was queen c1, but that just allows knight takes d4. So it was a nice start to the first game of the Blitz Tournament. Stay tuned for the second game, where I play one of the top seeds, a very strong Grandmaster. And also let me know if you have feedback about the format of this video. I don't usually do too much like after the fact live commentary on these games, so let me know if you'd like to see a different layout or a different way that I approach these videos. Look forward to reading comments, but stay tuned for the next one, and I'll see you guys soon.